So there hasn't been a whole lot of Christmas fun going around here. If you follow me on Insta, then you know that we've been sick. We've had sick kids. And that kind of puts a damper on things because they don't feel like doing anything. And after helping them and taking care of them, I don't really either. We did have the girls' Christmas concert last night. Gage and Taya couldn't go because they were sick. But the girls did great and it was super fun. And tonight, I mean, they're still out of it. So they just went to bed early and everyone's in bed for the night. And so I figured that I would fill you in. A few weeks ago, when we did the symbols of Christmas, and I mentioned that Alexis and Taya couldn't do it, and that I had a few epiphanies that day, and that I would share them with you, and I haven't yet. But now that I have a moment, because the kids are asleep and we're not doing Christmas tonight, so I'm going to use this video. The kids were home, and we were playing in the snow, and epiphany number 1 was when I walked into the living room. Haley was getting ready, putting her coat and her shoes and everything on to get ready to go outside and play in the snow. And I opened my mouth to say something to her to help her get ready in a way that I thought would be faster. And then I stopped and I closed my mouth and I watched her. And I realized that she was getting it done, just in a different way than I would have. And so there was not really a need to correct her, because my way is not always right, even though it might have saved her 2 minutes. What's the harm in her doing it the way that she was doing it and getting it done that way? No problem, right? And so it kind of occurred to me that that probably happens a lot in my life, where I think that, oh, let's just do it this way, right? It's quicker, it's faster. But if somebody doesn't think the same way as me, then it's not quicker for them. It's harder. And that was my epiphany number 1, that I need to just step back and let them do things the way that they are doing them, because that's the way it works for them, and that's just fine. Epiphany number 2. We hear all the time, right, that if we speak to our kids, then they'll listen more than if we yell at them, right? I mean, every parent has heard that. I'm guilty of not doing that sometimes, right? Sometimes it's easier to just yell it out there and tell them to knock it off. Like I tell people, my kids are super great, but they're not perfect. Well, we had an incident at home with some choices that 2 of the kids made. They weren't allowed to participate that night, and they had to go to bed. I mean, when I heard about what happened, it was not such a little thing. I mean, it involved words of hate and throwing pencils, things that could have really hurt someone in their heart and physically. And my first instinct was to yell at them. Why are you behaving like this? Why are you talking like that? We don't do that. We don't throw pencils and hurt people, right? We all just want to yell. I wanted to, but I didn't. And we were able to have a conversation about why those were wrong choices and what my responsibility is to keep them from hurting each other. And the conversation lasted about 10 minutes. But, I mean, they still dealt with the consequences. They had to go to bed. They had to miss out on the story and the activity that night. But I truly felt that they got more out of that moment than if I had yelled and screamed and told them to go to bed. Because that doesn't solve anything. It doesn't help fix the problem. And so it's kind of funny, right? Because we hear this all the time. If you talk to your kids, they'll understand you. They'll listen better. Making that choice in that big, huge moment was a true eye-opener Like, it really does work. And I talk to my kids. I have super conversations with them. We talk all the time. But in those moments, I can get mad, and I don't often take the second to explain to them why. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But in such a big moment, I realized that it really works. So that's my challenge. When you are so mad and you're up to here and you want to scream and yell, just take one breath and hold it in and just talk, because it makes a world of difference, I realized that night. Okay, so epiphany number 3. 2 of the kids went to bed. The other 3 of us sat and read this story, the Symbols of Christmas, or Teach the Children, whichever one. Well, halfway through the story, okay, we stopped reading because there's a little section about lights and how, if you imagine that each little Christmas light is one of Heavenly Father's children, how wow and wonderful that is, and what a good comparison, because when you look at a strand of lights, there's 100 lights on it. And so I had stopped and I kind of said, wow, I've heard this story before. I never really thought of that. It never really hit me like it did. And I was just not reading it. And then the kids were responding. They were asking questions. We stopped in the middle of this story. We stopped for a good 45 minutes, at least 45 minutes. And they were asking questions about the church and the gospel and the temple. And they were just asking questions and questions. And it was way after bedtime. And I could have said, wait, let's stop. We got to finish the story. Then we can come back, right? But most of those questions probably wouldn't have been there anymore. Or I could have said, oh, come on, it's bedtime. Go to bed. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But for sure, everyone would have forgot what we were talking about. Sometimes the best teaching moments with your kids is when you're not trying to. Doing things like family home evening, or if you're in a different, gospel, then you do different things with your family to teach them. And those are great. Those are necessary, and those help families. But they're not the only times to teach your kids. And sometimes it's not even the best. Those aren't even the best lessons. Sometimes it's those daily conversations, those questions that they ask when they have a question. Sometimes it's just those questions, whether they're trying to get out of bed and they ask a question, or whether you're in the middle of a story and they ask a question, or whether you're in the middle of doing dishes and they ask a question. Those questions are the best teaching moments. Planning a lesson, planning a discussion, those are great. But don't forget that oftentimes the best moments to teach the kids is when they're asking questions, and those aren't always in the most opportune times for you, right? So take that time and answer their question and put them to bed at 9 o'clock instead of at 7:30, because it's worth it. And that conversation that we had was awesome. And it's happened before. We've had dinner and they'd ask a question, and then dinner went an hour and a half and we weren't even eating. We were just sitting there hanging out. I'm not perfect. I am not perfect at that either. Sometimes I will say, oh, we'll talk about it later. I'm busy, right? Or can you ask me that after I'm done cooking? But, it was a great reminder that night that you can't always plan for these things. You have to know what you want to teach your kids. That way when they do ask the questions, that you can answer them. But it doesn't always have to be in a family home evening or in a set family discussion. Because when one question is asked and one question is answered, it's a beautiful thing between you and your kids. So anyways, I hope you take these things and you think about them, but also find things that you learn every day and that kind of stand out to you. And when you learn that, share with other people, because parents and friends and neighbors, that's what they need to be doing. They need to share and learn with each other. We grow together. We do a lot by working together. I truly think that it takes a village, and that that saying is not just old-fashioned. I think that we need to take those things we learn and share them and give our knowledge to other people. And I know what I'm sharing is not the first time you've heard it. It's not the first time I've heard it. But it just was something that really hit home, and I wanted to share it, and I wanted to remind everybody to remember those things, that not everybody's going to do things the way that we do, and that's okay. They get it done. And having a conversation in those big moments when your kids are truly acting up, having a conversation instead of yelling at them is, wow, it was awesome. And answer their questions. Don't be afraid to ask a question that entices their thinking either. Kids are capable of thinking and knowing and offering opinions, and I think it's great to hear them. Anyway, so I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and that you continue to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. I know we're not, we're lacking in subscribers, but that's okay. It's fun for us, and we like to share it with our family that watches from far away. But we'd love for you to follow along and keep learning and growing and enjoying with us.